You probably remember the smell of a Detroit Diesel 71 series or the low, rhythmic thrum of a John Deere 4020 echoing across the field at dusk. Back then, metal had a language we could all understand. If a head gasket blew or an injection pump lost its timing, you didn't need a digital permission slip from a corporate office in Moline or Germany to fix what belonged to you. You reached for your toolbox, felt the heat radiating off the cast iron block, and you solved the problem with your own two hands and the hard-earned knowledge of a lifetime. But today, that very act of independence, the simple repair of your own machine, has been rebranded as a form of digital piracy. You might have paid $500,000 for a modern tractor, but legally, you're just a guest inside a cab filled with microchips. You bought the steel, but they kept the soul of the machine locked behind a password you don't own. If you can't fix what you bought, do you really own it? Until the late 20th century, machine ownership was absolute and unquestioned. If you bought a South Bend manual lathe in 1950 or a 10-ton hydraulic press, the sales contract was the end of your relationship with the manufacturer and the beginning of your total sovereignty over the object. In that world of old iron, a service manual wasn't just an operator's guide. It was a transparent roadmap of the machine's anatomy. Every gear, every bearing, and every spring was documented so that the owner could keep the asset running for decades. The manufacturer made their profit on the sale of the machine and the replacement parts, but they never attempted to control what you did with the equipment after the check cleared. This was the era of mechanical sovereignty, where durability was the ultimate selling point and a proprietor's pride was keeping his iron running long past its predicted lifespan. The shift began quietly, and at first, it looked like undeniable progress. In the 1980s, electronics started to seep into the domain of cast iron. Electronic control units, or ECUs, were introduced to manage fuel injection and optimize performance. To the engineer of 1985, this was a marvel of efficiency. Engines became more powerful, more fuel efficient, and cleaner. The advent of the CAN bus protocol, or controller area network, allowed different parts of the machine to talk to each other through a digital nervous system. Sensors for pressure, temperature, and flow sent millions of messages per second, allowing for real-time adjustments that no human operator, no matter how experienced, could ever replicate. The steel was becoming smart, but with that intelligence came a legal vulnerability that manufacturers were quick to exploit. The historical breaking point arrived in 2016. That was the year giants like John Deere radically altered their end-user license agreements, or EULAs. For the first time, explicitly and aggressively, manufacturers argued before federal regulators that because embedded software is essential to the machine's operation, and because that software is protected by copyright, the buyer never actually acquires full ownership of the vehicle. Their argument was that the customer buys the metal chassis, but merely licenses the code required to make the engine turn over. In practice, this flipped the 1,000-year-old concept of property on its head, turning it into a glorified form of a subscription. The tractor in your barn, the truck in your fleet, or the excavator on your job site became a connected device that can be remotely throttled or disabled if the manufacturer decides you've breached the terms of their license. To understand the gravity of this, we have to look at the legal structure of what attorneys call the bundle of rights. Think of property not as a single solid block, but as a bundle of individual sticks. Each stick represents a right: the right to use, the right to sell, the right to destroy, and most importantly, the right to repair and modify. For centuries, when you bought a physical object, you received the whole bundle. What modern manufacturers have done is quietly pull out the repair and modify, stick and hide it under the cloak of intellectual property. They utilize a 1998 federal law called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or DMCA. Specifically, Section 1201 of this law criminalizes the bypassing of any technological protection measure, essentially a digital lock. Originally, this was designed to stop people from cracking the encryption on DVDs to pirate movies. However, heavy machinery manufacturers now use this same law to claim that if you plug an unauthorized diagnostic computer into your tractor to find out why it stalled, you are committing a federal crime by hacking a protected system. This digital barrier isn't just a legal formality. It is a technical wall that is insurmountable for the independent mechanic. The service advisor system used by John Deere, for instance, acts as the machine's sole gatekeeper. Even if you are a master mechanic and you've correctly identified that a fuel injector has failed, the simple physical act of swapping the part for a brand new, genuine OEM component isn't enough. Modern machines require a digital handshake. The new part must be married to the machine's central computer via a password and software that only authorized dealerships possess. Without this validation from the manufacturer's server, the machine simply refuses to recognize the new component, remaining dead in the field even though it is mechanically perfect. This scenario has created a maintenance monopoly that is simultaneously lucrative for the corporations and devastating for the owners. When a machine breaks down on a Tuesday morning during a 48-hour harvest window before a storm hits, downtime isn't measured in hours. It's measured in tens of thousands of dollars in lost yield. In the old days, you'd have it fixed with a wrench in 30 minutes. Today, you are forced to wait for a dealership technician who might be 3 counties away, charging exorbitant service call fees and an hourly rate that faces zero market competition. The economy of scale in modern American farming has been taken hostage by a single line of code. The manufacturers defend these restrictions by using what we call the emissions shield. The official line is that software locks are necessary to ensure users don't tinker with engine settings and violate environmental laws like the Clean Air Act. They claim that if owners had access to the software, they would engage in chipping, boosting horsepower, and bypassing emissions hardware, like the diesel particulate filter, DPF, or the selective catalytic reduction, SCR, systems. However, right to repair advocates and farmers' organizations point out that this is a convenient half-truth. The access required to diagnose a faulty temperature sensor or recalibrate a transmission is fundamentally different from the access needed to rewrite a fuel map. The current lockout is total. It doesn't just prevent pollution. It prevents vital, basic maintenance. The Nixing the Fix report, published by the Federal Trade Commission in 2021, dealt a heavy blow to this corporate narrative. After years of investigation, the FTC concluded that there was scant evidence to support manufacturers' claims that repair restrictions were necessary for safety or environmental protection. The report highlighted that companies use their dominant position to stifle competition from independent shops, forcing consumers to pay inflated prices. The real issue faced by the man in the field isn't a desire to pollute, but the extreme fragility of modern emission systems. Nitrogen sensors and DEF tanks are notoriously prone to failure in high-dust, high-vibration work environments. When one of these $50 sensors sends an error signal, the machine's software triggers what is known as limp mode. This drops the engine's power to a crawl, rendering a 600-horsepower tractor useless and often stranding it in a dangerous position on a highway or a steep incline. This is the second part of the script, picking up exactly where we left off. This section dives deep into the underground resistance, the legal battlegrounds, and the corporate strategy to end ownership as we know it. This artificial scarcity of information and tools has birthed a desperate, high-stakes underground economy, a digital black market for iron. If you walk into a machine shop in rural Nebraska or a dairy farm in upstate New York today, you might find something that would have looked like science fiction 30 years ago. Alongside the heavy-duty impact wrenches and the jars of degreaser, you'll see a ruggedized laptop running cracked software. Because the manufacturers have slammed the front door shut, farmers have been forced to go through the back window. Much of this resistance is centered in Eastern Europe, specifically Ukraine and Poland. Why there? Because in the post-Soviet landscape, there's a deep-rooted culture of making it work with whatever tools are available, combined with a world-class generation of software engineers who aren't afraid of a little corporate litigation. On forums hidden behind layers of encryption, Ukrainian hackers provide what the American manufacturers refuse to sell: unlocked firmware. For a few $100s, a fraction of what a single dealership visit costs, a farmer can download a file that bypasses the digital handshake requirement. This allows them to pair their own parts, clear their own error codes, and most importantly, stay in the field when the clock is ticking. But it's a dangerous game. By installing this software, the owner is effectively jailbreaking a $500,000 asset. One wrong line of code, one power surge during the upload, and the tractor becomes a 20-ton paperweight. Furthermore, it gives the manufacturers the perfect excuse to void every warranty and insurance policy attached to the machine. It is a choice made out of pure necessity, born from the frustration of a man who feels like a stranger in his own machine. This tension has finally boiled over from the workshops into the statehouses. For years, the right to repair movement was seen as a niche cause for tech enthusiasts who wanted to fix their own iPhones. That changed when the American farmer got involved. They brought a level of political weight and common sense grit that the tech giants weren't prepared for. In states like Nebraska, Colorado, and Minnesota, the battle lines have been drawn with surgical precision. The manufacturers, led by the Association of Equipment Manufacturers, AEM, have spent millions on lobbyists to argue that unfettered access to software would lead to a catastrophic surge in tractor accidents and environmental disasters. They paint a picture of rogue farmers tuning their engines to levels that would melt the pistons and smog out the countryside. But the farmers countered with a simpler, more devastating truth. We aren't asking to redesign the engine. We're asking for the diagnostic tools we need to keep it running. In 2023, the movement achieved its first major victory with Colorado's Senate Bill 23-101. It was a landmark piece of legislation that specifically targeted agricultural equipment, forcing manufacturers to provide the same diagnostic manuals, software tools, and parts to independent mechanics and owners that they provide to their own dealerships. It was a crack in the corporate armor, but the industry's response was swift and calculated. To head off more aggressive state laws, John Deere and several other major manufacturers signed a series of Memorandums of Understanding, MOUs, with the American Farm Bureau Federation. On paper, these moves looked like a total surrender. The companies promised to make tools and manuals available nationwide. However, seasoned veterans of the industry and legal experts saw the fine print for what it really was: a strategic retreat. Unlike a state law, an MOU is a private agreement. It has no teeth. There is no government agency to enforce it, and the manufacturers can walk away from the table whenever it suits their bottom line. It was a handshake deal offered in an era where the corporations had already proven their word was only as good as the latest version of their EULA. The reason the manufacturers are fighting so hard for every inch of digital territory becomes clear when you look at the long-term horizon of the global economy. We are moving away from a product-based economy and toward a service-based model. In the corporate boardrooms of Silicon Valley and Moline, this is known as Equipment as a Service, or EAS. The goal is no longer to sell you a machine once and see you again in 15 years when you're ready for an upgrade. The goal is to turn you into a permanent subscriber. Think about the modern automotive industry. We've already seen companies like BMW experiment with subscription-based heated seats. The hardware is already in the car, but you have to pay a monthly fee to unlock the software that makes them turn on. Now, apply that logic to a combine harvester. Imagine a machine where the hardware is capable of 600 horsepower, but you only paid for the 400 horsepower tier. If you hit a particularly tough patch of crop and need more power, You might have to click a button on your touchscreen and pay a performance fee for a 24-hour boost. Or consider the data. Modern machines are mobile data centers, tracking every bushel harvested, the exact moisture content of the soil, and the fuel efficiency of every acre. Right now, that data is being harvested by the manufacturers and sold back to the farmers or to big data firms, often without the farmer seeing a dime of the profit. This is the ultimate evolution of the microchip era, the end of the secondary market. If the software is licensed and not owned, how do you sell a used tractor? If the manufacturer decides that the license doesn't transfer to the second owner, the resale value of that machine, the equity that farmers have relied on for generations to fund their retirement or expand their operations, simply evaporates. You are left with a pile of old iron that no one can start because the digital key has been revoked by a server halfway across the continent. We are witnessing the slow-motion destruction of the independent operator. Whether you are a trucker, a farmer, or a construction contractor, your ability to compete has always been tied to your ability to manage your overhead. And the biggest overhead is the machinery. When you lose the right to repair, you lose the ability to control your costs. You become a cog in a vertical monopoly where the manufacturer sells you the machine, sells you the parts, dictates the service schedule, and owns the data generated by your hard labor. But where there is oppression, there's always an equal and opposite reaction. In the shadow of these corporate fortresses, a new kind of resistance is taking shape, a movement that isn't just about breaking locks, but about building entirely new foundations. We are seeing the rise of the open source movement in a world that used to be defined by proprietary secrets. Projects like Open Source Ecology and the Global Village Construction Set are working to create the blueprints for 50 different industrial machines, from tractors to brick presses, that anyone can build, maintain, and improve. These aren't just hobbyist toys. They are a declaration of independence. They are built on the principle that the tools of civilization should belong to the people who use them, not the shareholders of a distant corporation. This isn't just about code either. It has led to one of the most fascinating and unexpected economic shifts in the modern industrial era, the old iron renaissance. If you look at farm auctions across the American Midwest today, you'll see something that defies traditional economic logic. Tractors from the late 1970s and early 1980s, the legendary John Deere 4440s or the Case IH Magnums, are selling for record-breaking prices. In some cases, a well-maintained tractor with 5,000 hours on it from 1982 is selling for more today than it cost brand new 40 years ago. Why? Because the market is smarter than the marketing departments. A farmer knows that if he buys a 1980s era machine, he's buying a forever machine. He knows that if a sensor fails, he can bypass it. If a gear chips, he can weld it or find a replacement in a scrapyard. He knows that no server in Moline can turn his engine off. These machines have become a safe haven asset, a piece of technology that respects the owner's sovereignty. We are seeing a generation of men who would rather pay a premium for dumb iron they can trust than take a discount on smart steel that might betray them during the harvest. This brings us to a fundamental question that goes beyond the price of corn or the cost of a service call. What does it mean to be a tinkerer in the 21st century? The American spirit was built on the back of the person who wasn't afraid to take things apart. From the Wright brothers in their bicycle shop to the farmers who improvised repairs with baling wire and grit during the Great Depression, we have always been a nation of fixers. When a manufacturer tells you that a machine is too complex for you to understand, they aren't just protecting their profits. They are insulting your intelligence and stifling the very innovation that made this country an industrial powerhouse. When we lose the ability to repair, we lose the institutional knowledge of our trades. If the next generation of mechanics grows up in a world where every repair is just a module swap authorized by a remote server, We will lose the intuitive understanding of how things actually work. We will become a society of operators rather than creators. This is the hidden cost of the microchip revolution, the atrophying of the human hand and mind. The battle for the right to repair is at its heart, a battle for the soul of the middle class. It is about whether we will remain a nation of owners or become a nation of permanent renters. By 2026, the lines have been drawn clearly. We see the Federal Trade Commission finally stepping up its enforcement against unfair and deceptive repair restrictions. We see more states following Colorado's lead, moving past toothless moves and toward hard enforceable laws. But the real change has to come from the buyers themselves. It starts with a simple realization: the most expensive machine in the world is the one you aren't allowed to fix. As consumers, as farmers, and as tradesmen, we have to start voting with our wallets. We must support the manufacturers who provide open access to their systems and shun those who treat their customers like authorized users of their own property. We must demand that ownership means what it has meant for thousands of years: the total, unencumbered right to use, modify, and repair the things we buy. Think back to that bundle of rights we discussed. The manufacturers have spent the last 20 years trying to steal the repair stick from your bundle. It's time to take it back. It's time to remind the world that the man with the grease under his fingernails and the wrench in his hand isn't a threat to intellectual property. He is the backbone of the economy. He is the person who keeps the wheels of the world turning when the servers go down and the power grids fail. The old iron didn't just represent a different era of engineering. It represented a different era of respect between the builder and the user. We can have the microchips and we can have the efficiency, but we cannot afford to lose the sovereignty. We must insist on a future where the code is as transparent as the glass in the cab and where the digital locks are gone for good. Because in the end, if you have to ask for permission to turn the key in your own ignition, you haven't bought a tool, you've bought a leash. And it's high time we broke that leash and reclaimed our right to be the masters of our own machines. If it's your name on the title, it should be your hand on the wrench. Period. As we look toward the horizon of the next industrial age, let's make sure we aren't just building faster, smarter machines, but a more honest and fair world to use them in. Let's bring back the era where when you bought something, it stayed bought. Let's bring back the era of true ownership. Because if you can't fix it, you don't own it. And it's time we all started acting like owners again.